Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our coverage of the Amazing Race 37 here on We Know Amazing Race on Rob Has a Podcast. My name is Mike Camembloom for this particular podcast. And finally, I get to represent how truly cheesy I am given the theme of this week as we have an unbelievable penultimate week of the Amazing Race 37. Tensions are high, plenty of meltdowns, and one front runner ends up biting the dust as pungent as a nice hard cheese. Now, of course, I am not alone here. Thrilled to welcome back after her absence last week. I would say the big cheese of our Amazing Race coverage here on RHAP, Jessica Liese. Welcome back, Jess.
It was disappointing, Mike. You could have done cheddar.
Well, we'll talk about one team that's not making any more cheddar, considering that they are eliminated. I mean, just think about the power that you've amassed over the course of covering this show for over a decade here. That the show, our friend Phil Kogan actually knew ahead of time the week you would be out and threw in for the first time in 3 seasons an out and out non elimination leg to make sure that you would not miss an exit interview opportunity. They were waiting with bated breath to have you back talking about this show.
Well, I mean, I already knew that I had this power back when I was pregnant and they very graciously decided not to run Amazing Race at all that fall because they could not deal with the prospect that I would not be here to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, I think out there in the universe, I think everybody in the Amazing Race pantheon of gods knew that they would need to have a non-elimination leg out of nowhere. And honestly, this is like, if they weren't doing this kind of new twist every week situation, I'd be like, this is hinky AF. But
Yeah,
to what
exactly.
end?
Something stinks, and it's not just the Roquefort.
I have so many thoughts on the cheese, Mike.
Well, we've got a lot to get into with that because it was a big week. Any safety net that got provided at the last minute has been promptly pulled away as we get yet another really back and forth episode. I really enjoyed this week with just watching how much these teams were getting shuffled around. I mean, look at the fact that our eventual eliminated team, Mark and Brett, were in last for the vast majority of the leg and jumped all the way up to second before eventually falling back down in last. This was one of those rare legs where, with the exception of Carson and Jack, every single team either was in last place at one point or thought they were in last place at one point, which creates this natural sense of panic, this heightened sense of stakes. As Holden says, there's kind of nowhere to hide at this point. A lot of the teams that are left are some of the best of the season. And so it led to so much dramatics going on. And listen, we will certainly get into how some of it might not have been the most fun type of dramatics. But Jess, now that you've been back, and you can also maybe parlay this into Final Five Part 1 last week in Naples, where finally, I guess we have the cheese to match all the pizza we got last week. What were your thoughts on the past couple legs of the Amazing Race 37?
Well, I would say if we're going from Naples to Strasbourg, we're really going from like a pizza to a tarte flambe. Which, different kind of cheese, but it's still a flat piece of bread with stuff on it.
Yeah, exactly.
And still tasty. Like, this was a tasty leg. I would say this was a very tasty leg of the Amazing Race. And you really did not at any point know exactly what was going to happen. And some of this, I think, is down to clever editing, especially like having had the chance to talk to Brett and Mark today. I think the writing was more or less on the wall for them a little earlier than we may have thought, but it was also, you had every team like jockeying for position and nobody was safe at any point. And you really truly did not know how it was going to end up until you got to that final match. So I was happy. I think this has been overall, I think this has been a season of high stakes and a lot of tension and a lot of unpredictability, which is not something you can say every season.
Yeah, certainly not. Yeah, I've sort of been, especially because we're, again, approaching the end, a bit of a programming note for people out there. So, again, We will have 2 episodes next week of The Amazing Race. We will have the penultimate leg in its typical slot, 9:30 p.m. following Survivor on Wednesday, and then Thursday at 9 p.m. Following, I think it's like a double header of comedies on CBS. We are going to get our final leg. So, a week from today, Jess, we'll be encroaching upon finding out who's going to win the whole shebang. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about how do I feel about this season overall. And it's so interesting because despite this being labeled the season of surprises, where from a production perspective, it really is a mixed bag of like, you have no idea what the quality is going to be and what they bring in. This honestly is one of the most consistent seasons that I think we've had in recent memory, especially as of late, where I think it helps that we've had a very top heavy competitive group of teams. I mean, I know there was a first stretch of this season where it truly felt like we were kind of unfortunately shedding a lot of the teams that were not necessarily as up to snuff as some of the top people there. But I mean, I think this leg was kind of, it wouldn't even use the term predictably, but like it made sense as to why it was so back and forth. Because even though Han and Holden are sort of, I would say, unfortunately, the outliers in terms of like race skills and previous placements, if they're in the pack as they were for most of this leg, all the other teams are on like kind of equal footing, that there was so much back and forth going on. And so that to me speaks of a really solid Amazing Race season, no matter what team wins. And I will also say, as another piece of Amazing Race news, you mentioned the fortuitous timing back in the day of the Amazing Race not being on in the fall while you were giving birth to your wonderful son. Unfortunately, for I guess those who are expecting right now, that is not the case for Amazing Race fans. It is good news, though, as the Amazing Race is officially coming back in the fall on CBS. CBS did their big fall schedule announcement yesterday, May 7th, and they announced that the Amazing Race 38, which aired earlier, or filmed, I should say, earlier this year, will air in the fall. No confirmation as to premiere date yet, nor maybe the finale date of some other CBS reality shows that might make it incredibly interesting for certain reasons. But I did some research on this, Jess, and what's interesting is that us dyed-in-the-wool Amazing Race fans used to think of this as just a typical normality, right? Survivor and Amazing Race would air 2 seasons every calendar year, but it's been a long time since we had that happen. It happened once due to the COVID restrictions, kind of like cutting off a lot of filming schedules, where seasons 33 and 34 both aired in 2022. Outside of that, it's been 10 years since we've had another Amazing Race season air twice in the same calendar year.
That's shocking to me. That's that seems wrong, but I think you're right about it.
Yeah, because remember that back in like, I would want to say like season 30, they really slotted an Amazing Race for a while as like the holdover show between Survivor seasons. And so for a while it occupied that spring slot. And then when the writers' strike happened, in 2023, then they slotted the Amazing Race in for the fall. They brought back season 36 for the spring. They took off this past fall, and now they're back in the spring and fall again.
Yeah, and of course, before that we had pandemic stuff, and yeah, I guess it just feels like we're always here. I'm always sitting here. I'm always on the podcast. And yeah, but we will be here in the fall. I imagine we'll be here talking about this like we never left. Because clearly, like, neither one of us got elected Pope today, so we got our whole fall free.
And look, I even dressed up for the
you even have the hat.
Didn't elect me.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened.
I was waiting for the cheese-filled smoke to pervade the air, but we are on our way out of Italy and over to France as we start this leg. We make our way over to Strasbourg via Germany, which will trip up one team in the first destination of this leg. And just to your point, we'll get into, again, our rare route info task that we get on Amazing Race US nowadays, but we get like a hint of one as we start here in Strasbourg, as we go to the Council of Europe, and they are asked by this very lovely woman, what are the 4 countries that they have actively raced in Europe so far? And of course, we have Bulgaria, Italy, France, where they currently are, and technically Germany, considering they played Ode to Joy all too briefly when introducing Strasbourg. They really wanted us to really focus in on the German part. And everyone was able to not get tripped up by this trick question, except for Alyssa and Josiah. There might have been a small chance, Jess, that they would have used their express pass on this rather than the cheese.
Oh man, that would have been entertaining for sure. But they got it
They said
eventually.
Indonesia was in Europe, Jess.
They said the UAE was in Europe. But it could be one of those things, like, technically, if you have if you go to Tahiti, you've technically gone to France. Maybe they thought it was one of those things.
Yeah,
Or
I guess
technically,
that's true.
if you go to the Falkland Islands, you've gone to the UK.
I guess that's true. Yeah, when you think about imperialism overall, maybe it was a regard of like, well, it technically wasn't ever not part of Europe, and so it is part of the Council of Europe. But regardless, everyone is able to soldier through here, and the big to do for this leg is the surprise brought in. It is the return of, they call it the head to head, but Phil quite literally, I think, says in the prompt, like, face off head to head. Like, I felt like they were really trying to capture the audiences of Canada and the US as to, like, what do you call it? Regardless, potato. They are going to be sort of co-opting the roadblock here into a 1v1 showdown via water jousting. What did you make about the return of the head-to-head for the first time in 6 seasons?
Well, first of all, we could call it a double battle too. Like, why is nobody calling it a double battle? Because nobody's that deep of a nerd. I answer my own question. I always like this. I think it works really well in Canada. We like it when it airs on Amazing Race Canada, and it's just not worked well in the US. Most of the time when it doesn't work out, it's because of leg design. It's because it is something, and I think, it's the same reason we don't like the U-turn before the detour, is because you should not be screwed so hard you can't come back from it. And it's me saying that and not you, so we can get away with saying that on the podcast.
I'm still trying to be papal here. Yeah, I got to be devout, just in case
Yes.
we need an understudy.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you got to be prepared, because it could be reconclaving at any moment. But I think I like it here because I like it near the top of the leg. So if you have something that is definitely going to put somebody in objective, unequivocal last place, you have to give them a chance to come back from it. You have to give them more than like 100 feet of runway to the pit stop. You have to make sure that they can still race, because it's not racing if you just get stuck there standing there for 10 minutes while everybody else checks in. So I like it here. I think it worked really well here. I think this was a funny task. I think it was funny to watch everybody like bodying each other with these sticks.
Sort of. I think a lot of them more so won by default, where like, Carson pushed a little bit to the point where he just kind of like gave his lance over to Jonathan, and
just kind of threw the pole at him until it knocked him over that way. It's like one of those hooks pulling somebody off of a vaudeville stage.
Yeah, exactly. So it was more so about just kind of outbalancing your opponent to a certain respect.
Yeah. Or it's like those survivor challenges where you're doing a challenge until you run out of challenge stuff, and then it's how long can you stand there.
Exactly. So what I will say is I completely agree with you. I was happily surprised about how they implemented the head-to-head here, because I talked about it last week with Sasha Joseph, what we've seen from the US perspective, which has been, to your point, just putting it at the end of the leg. And this is when Phil can put on his best PvP hat and, do his own color commentary. And that would make sense, because instead of doing a 10-minute penalty, then it's just like, all right, this one's for all the marbles. The winner survives, the loser is eliminated. But that obviously differs from the other ways we've seen it instituted. This is going back to how we usually see it in other versions outside of the Amazing Race. And so I think a 10-minute penalty was like a nice happy medium to go for. That was just the natural cost of losing rather than just having the door slammed in your face. And as much as I talked about how these are not necessarily expert jousters, as much as Carson and Jack might try to claim this is 5-hole adjacent, I still thought the whole like Karate Kid aspect of like, in order to be better at jousting, you have to lean forward and theoretically make yourself more vulnerable to being attacked. I don't know. It felt very Taoist, Jess. It felt very philosophical in nature.
Yeah, well, that's a common martial arts thing, is like slipping inside a punch. That's pretty standard, but yeah, I do like it. And I love that it rewards skills that you wouldn't think of as immediately being the skills you need. Like Han pointing out that she has the lowest center of gravity of anybody on the race, and then like clearly like just getting up there like she was born to boat joust. I I thought that was fantastic, and I love it when she gets a task that's so far into her wheelhouse like that. So especially like in contrast with the next task that was very much not in her wheelhouse. But I think there's something to be said for having this challenge that's like you don't obviously know what qualities you need to be good at it until you try it. And it's more about using your momentum than it is about any kind of brute strength.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, let's go from a wheelhouse to a wheel of cheese house here. And I would say, with no offense to the stork nest, one of the hardest tasks of the leg here. And it was a freaking route info task. And it was so hard just that one team uses their express pass. So this is just identifying 9 cheeses by name and based on taste. You said you had a lot of thoughts about this. Let me pull open the cloche here. Feast
Hmm.
away.
So my first question, and this is something like I was even thinking like while I'm watching the episode, well, if Han and Holden go out, I'm gonna have to make this my first question. So this is gonna have to wait till next week. But
Okay.
I want to know, like, for some people who are lactose intolerant, it's specifically cow cheese that is the problem.
Mm.
So, could they have, if they had a large knowledge of cheese, or maybe they could have asked, could they have assigned Han all of the cheeses that are not cow cheese?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think what it came down to was less so about Holden's digestive issues, could not hold
Yeah.
in perhaps his dairy, but more
Yes.
so the fact that because he has lived a life of staying away from cheese, dude's palate is completely washed and he has
It
no idea
was
what
was it
cheeses
Holden
really
who
taste.
was lactose intolerant? I couldn't remember which one it was.
Yeah, Holden was the one
Okay.
who was,
Well,
and so
which
maybe that it might
yeah.
explain a bit of his irritability later on, is because his bowels were quite irritable to match.
Yeah, which it surprises me that the race is gonna make you do something like that when you have a food allergy. So they're usually pretty careful about that, or they like it's been a minute since we've had something that's like they're very clear that one member of the team cannot complete this. But
Hmm.
this is something they're both asked to do. And I guess they still have an out because whichever one of them is not lactose intolerant could just shoulder the entire load. It's the same thing as like um way back, we're going way back many seasons when Margie and Luke had that detour where you had to either do a music task or a bartending task. They had to do the bartending task because Luke could not do the music task. But there was an option, there was something you could do. And I don't know if I feel like that's super fair, but I'm glad that nobody threw up. I'm glad nobody said it was gross. This
Hmm.
has been a problem with Amazing Race and food in the past. Is here is this local delicacy. It's so gross. Who would eat this? Well, the locals eat it. But this was like I'm watching. I'm like I kind of want some cheese right now. This would be great.
The question that I had is that obviously, if you're just looking at what you have to do, you have like 9 factorial essentially options that you can
Mm,
choose between, and you have to get it right, every single one correct. This isn't someone where it's like, all right, you've got 6 right, go on and figure out what they are. If you got them right, you have to figure out which ones you got wrong, and also they stopped you as you went in line. So
hmm
theoretically, if you got like 6 correct, I wonder if there was a rule where you had to like, I don't know, run back and touch the cheesemonger's hand and then come back again. Otherwise, I would just stand there being like, okay, these are the 3 that are left. I know the first 6. I'll just read the first 6 off again and keep trying combinations until I get it right.
Well, I think I wondered if it was possible to brute force it, but I think you had to at least go back inside the cheese shop and come back out before you made your next guess, because it was giving that challenge in Brazil in season 13 where the answer was basically just read everything on every sign until you get the right answer. Um, I wondered if that was possible, but I think like given that everybody made one guess and then went back, it's like which ones are right because they stop you as soon as you get one wrong. And it's more like just remembering that sequence. It also looked like you weren't allowed to write it down,
Yeah.
which was interesting to me too, because then it becomes not just can you identify this by sight and taste and smell, but can you also remember the right sequence? Because every time you're adding a new one onto it, and I would imagine you don't necessarily keep all of those cheeses in order in your head very
Yeah.
easily.
And you get a nice, delightful segment of everyone, with the exception of Han, just, even though we're not dealing with meat, absolutely butchering all the French pronunciations, trying to mimic what this cheesemonger is saying, and
Yeah,
just making
Munster.
yeah, just making a mockery of the language.
Yeah, no, it's Munster. It's okay. You don't have to Frenchify that one.
No, it's the equivalent of going abroad in Ibiza, but over the course of like a leg, I'm like, aha, well, I'm back home. Can you get past me the Munster? Yes, I know the authentic French pronunciation, begrudgingly so. I had to say it 10 times in Strasbourg.
Yeah, it was something, but I think there's, nothing wrong with a cheese challenge in France. And this is a challenge, like, we've had so many variations on this over the years, where, yeah, 10 varieties of a local thing. Like, we had mustard a couple seasons ago. I think
Oh, yeah.
they have literally done cheese on Amazing Race Canada. We've done sausage. We've done, I can't remember what all else we've done. We've done tea, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun because it's also like there's also some vocabulary involved. Like, if you know cheese or if you know French, you have a little bit of a leg up there too. And again, this speaks to non-obvious skill sets that make you good at a task.
Yeah, who would have thought that just sitting home eating cheese all day would be something that could win you $1 million on The Amazing Race?
Working on your night cheese.
There you go. Liz Lemon found her 5-hole. All right, well, let's move on to our detour here. And obviously, we'll talk about all the Express Pass stuff involved when we get to Alyssa and Josiah proper, but just talking through the tasks here. Our detour for this leg is Out to Dry versus For the Birds. And for many reasons, Jess, between the navigational aspects and the vast amounts of attention to detail, this was, I feel like for the first time in a while, a quite unbalanced detour.
Yeah, it was also one you couldn't switch.
Oh
And
yeah, this was the rare detour in modern day Amazing Race that was not around the corner from each other. Even though
right,
Mark and Brett will run into Hunt and Holden.
they're similarly located. Like, they're both in the same village, but you can't hop back and forth. And it was limited stations, which I think was not explicated on the show, but you could only have 3 people at the laundry. And like, who in their right mind would do the stork task if you could do the laundry? And I feel like if you were at the back of the pack, it kind of disincentivized you from even trying that one, because that one is obviously the one to take.
Yeah, I completely agree that, yeah, it's more so like, all right, I guess we'll do this and hope that either another team gets lost or we just ace this stork task and then we can move on. But let's talk about the stork task, because there is always one thing to trip up these teams. And what was really interesting, Jess, is that for the longest time, they really kind of put us in the shoes of these racers and did not tell us what the issue was with Brett and Mark and Alyssa and Josiah. I mean, I was the one to notice like Alyssa initially throwing away the white paper, but I did not think about the fact that the board had to be a part of it as the display was showing. I certainly didn't think about the fact that the knots had to be showing underneath. And I think even Brett and Mark referred to the fact in my interview that the judge may not have actually done that the first couple times they watched the demonstration.
Hmm. Well, I think you have to think about it like a stork, Mike, because I don't want to live in a wreath. I don't want to live in a wreath with jagged wire. I don't want to raise my family inside a wreath with jagged wires pointing up.
I mean, that's like perfect barbed wire, though, right? Keeps out any and all intruders. Those babies are safe AF.
Yeah, but it's not very good in the baby proofing department. Like, I wouldn't put my human child in there. He'd end up scratching himself up pretty bad. I would also, it's like, of course you got to put a piece of paper down over the board because it's got slats. Your babies are going to fall through the slats. It's just logic. Like, you got to think about it like a stork.
I mean, both Alyssa and Josiah and Brett and Mark talked about if they had survived wanting to use the money to raise a child. I guess this was the first test, right?
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe if Scott and Lori had been a part of it, they're like, oh my God, we got to baby proof the shit out of this nest.
Oh, yeah. Scott and Lori would have rocked
Ironically
this.
enough for the stork.
Yeah, I'm telling you, like, they'd be able to look at this from a point of view of a curious human child and be like, yeah, no, this is not safe. Well, we're going to make it safe.
Yeah, so what did you think about the board being incorporated in particular, and the task being a little less handholdy to us as the viewer? Again, I feel like that's a little atypical. I feel like we get the nice sort of iris in on like the thing that the teams are getting wrong usually.
Yeah, I like being able to guess though. I like having that
Hmm.
like and also I'm speaking of someone who has come off of being able to unscramble the survivor word almost immediately when I saw the letters. I was feeling pretty high on that myself. So I like feeling right now I have that vindicating feeling of like I'm one step ahead of these guys because I know what they're gonna do. And or I can just guess. I wasn't necessarily right the first couple of times. It's like I know they need to put it on the board, but what else do they need to do here? Oh, they got to make sure they get rid of the slats, and it, I think sometimes you want that. I don't think you want it every time. I don't want it to be ambiguous every time, but it's just like fiction writing. You gotta tease out your details. In certain places, you want to explain everything, and in certain places, you want to keep people guessing.
I mean, speaking of Scott and Laurie, talk about got fun betrayal. Well, let's move over to the other side of things. A more ho hum task by comparison, out to dry, relatively straightforward. I mean, they'll describe the process. It's essentially just washing clothes by the side of a canal. Maybe it speaks to Han and Holden's age, Jess, that the 220 somethings struggled doing their own laundry by hand.
This was Well, Mark and Brett mentioned that this is the kind of task that they wish they could have taken because this is a task where you know when you're done, or you should know when
Right.
you're done. It's not the case for Han and Holden. They did not know when they were done because that whole good enough philosophy really didn't pan out for them because their bar for good enough was not quite good enough.
Yeah, they shot too low initially.
Yeah, I mean it's fine. I think sometimes it is like, let's just see if this is right, and if it's not right, we'll do a better job. But I think you could tell whether you had done the job or not, and not every that is not true of every challenge. And Mark and Brett had alluded to one of their rules that they set forth for themselves before they went on the race was we're always going to choose the task where we know whether or not we're done.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that made sense here. And again, the only drama was really like Han and Holden not scrubbing the crayon off of one garment. I would say the most entertaining thing by far, Jess, were the NPCs of this. And I'm not sure if the producers purposely wanted to provide a distraction from these pick-a-little ladies of Strasbourg, France, just walking around gossiping, probably talking about all of these ugly Americans trying to wash their clothes, or if it just happened coincidentally and it was pure kismet.
I'm sure that they were hand selected and even told what to talk about. I wish I spoke French. I want to know what they were saying.
Yeah, Han, let us know what they were saying. Was this like the episode of Seinfeld where Elaine hears what's going on at the nail salon? Like, I want to see if they were shit talking them to their face or not.
How would you, Mike, if that was you, how could you avoid that? How would you not be able to?
Yeah, I guess that's very true. I mean, talk about like getting snapped out of the immersion. If they just start getting into arguments with the washerwoman being like, hey, how dare you? I'm trying my best here. I'm sorry that my work isn't good enough to your standards.
Yeah, I think I don't know if they'd be judging necessarily like how they're performing the task, but they might be judging everything else. Like the outfit and, the way they pronounce the French words.
Yeah, did you hear about how they were saying the cheese before? Come on.
And I'm saying, like, oh, that one guy ate all that cheese and now he can't stop farting.
Exactly. Like, oh no, this guy's gonna dirty up the clothes even more than how they found him.
Yeah, look at the film crew. Like, look at the shoes on that cameraman. Like, he clearly looks American. Like, nobody in France wears sneakers. That's the thing they always tell people when they're traveling. Like, when you go to Europe, nobody
Interesting.
wears sneakers. Everybody in Europe wears sneakers. Like, just don't wear brand new sneakers, right?
No, well, certainly they won't be brand new at this point in the race either.
Definitely not. We've been running around a lot. We're in the anti-penultimate leg here.
Well, before we get into the teams proper, I do want to talk about the running that these teams had to do with the pit stop, because this was something I was a little confused about. And I don't know if you got some clarity from Mark and Brett in your interview, Jess, but this pit stop is this really picturesque location at the top of the hill of this beautiful winery. Finally, they have some wine to go with that cheese. Though maybe we'll talk about one player who had plenty of wine earlier in this leg. But we saw a lot of teams struggle with parking, it seems. And I had trouble inferring Was there a marked parking lot they were supposed to go to? Because you had like the Alyssa and Josiah thing where they almost crash head on into this poor girl on her motorcycle, and she says like, no, park over here. I know Mark and Brett were telling me that they were debating like, all right, do we park somewhere and just try to hoof it up this giant hill? Do we have any clarification as to like, was there a specific path they were supposed to go on? Because it seemed like nearly everybody had issues getting to the pit stop.
I didn't get any specific clarity about the parking lot, but I did Google Maps this up last night while I was
Mm.
watching it, and it did look like there's a lot of access points to get up to the top of this hill, and you had to get to that specific one and leave your car there. And I think that was part of the confusion that everybody had was, where is that turnoff? And have we gone far enough? Can we just leave our car here? Because it didn't look like this is not an obvious parking lot. This is like a field where you leave your car. And I can see where that would cause a lot of confusion.
Yeah, Jonathan and Anna might be having some PTSD of like, I don't know if I want to leave my cars in any other,
Right.
grassy field.
Are they going to be able
Pavement
to
or
get the
nothing.
car out of there?
Yeah, exactly. It's pavement or nothing. Well, Jess, let's talk about the teams that have paved their way into the Final Four and one team that unfortunately fell short. And let's start by welcoming back to not only the podium, but the gold medal slot here. It's been a minute, but Carson and Jack have found their way to the front of the pack, and it has stayed that way. So Carson and Jack, despite, being second to last to start the leg, were in a really good position to begin. They did lose the first head-to-head, despite the fact that they sort of talked down everyone else jousting secondhand experience, I suppose. But seems like Jess, they really made up for it by the fact that they were basically the only team to not have navigational difficulties to or from the detour. And so they wrapped up their third first place finish of the season after a string of some murkier performances.
Mike, can you believe that this was a team that was 3 hours behind all of the other teams? It just goes to show that you are never totally out of it on The Amazing Race. And I love that they've come back. They were a strong team all along, and it would have been very sad to see them go out when they almost did. So to have them back up here on top is just even more delicious. And they had a lot of really funny character moments this episode. I especially liked when they are speculating on what the old ladies are gossiping about, and Jack says, "Well, they're calling us handsome and awesome and hot, obviously." Uh, that was very funny. And they're always so joyful. They're always having such a good time. It's like, I want these guys to do like a YouTube travelogue show. I would watch it.
Carson had a really interesting perspective that we hadn't heard before either from their team or really a lot of other teams, which is Carson admits that he's kind of a self-proclaimed control freak. And so he ends up quite literally backseat driving for Jack. And he says, the race is not a place to solve your control issues. The race is to use them to your advantage. And that's so intriguing, Jess, because I think a lot of us talk about, particularly when it comes to couples, as like the Amazing Race serving as some sort of therapy. And we've certainly heard about plenty of teams that have like gone to figure out their relationship. But we oftentimes say like, hey, the way a team works on the race is not indicative of the issues that you're facing outside of it. And this is not an opportunity under an incredibly unique environment to really try something new and shake up your relationship in a big way when there's $1 million on the line. And so again, I thought Carson really vocalized this uniquely of saying like, yeah, I know I've got flaws, but let me try to turn those liabilities into assets that can earn us the biggest asset of $1 million.
Yeah, and honestly, Mike, I can't think of any other teams that might need to hear this message.
Exactly. They
It's
might
so
have been able to
specific to Carson and Jack.
Yeah, they might have had to bullhorn it over to a adjoining car. That would be great. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll talk more about our predictions about next week moving forward, Jess. But do we think this means that like Carson and Jack are truly back in the hunt? I mean, for the longest time, I had said this is the team to beat. That was right before they hit this really rough streak between Bulgaria and Italy. Do we think, as they mentioned, like this is the perfect time to start peaking and ride this momentum into the finale?
I mean, I think they're back in it. At first place, you cannot argue with first place. And I think one of the things, I think to your point about their dynamic and about working out their issues, they have they have a dynamic that none of the other teams left have. And that is they don't have high stakes hovering over their heads. Like they do not
Hmm.
have a family bond they need to preserve. If they want to stop talking to each other tomorrow, they don't have to file any legal paperwork to do that. They are not as tied up in the personal bonds as these other teams are. And I think as a result, I think there's a little bit less pressure there. Like, I think you can talk to your friends differently from how you can talk to your romantic partners or your sibling. And I would argue that, I don't ever want to go on the Amazing Race with a romantic partner. I think the play is to get your best friend, the person that you can talk to as easily as you talk to your romantic partner. And I think you get somebody that knows you that well. And I think these two, it's a platonic bond they have that's as strong as any romantic bond, but does not have all the baggage with it. And I think that helps their dynamic an awful lot.
Yeah, and we find out about sort of the why of the two of them on the race or what they would do with the money. And look, it's always tough to compare the reasons why people go on this race between the two couples that are like, I want to start a family versus Jack saying, I'm going to funnel this into my D&D show. That'd be great.
Yeah, you know what though? I think why you want the money, I I don't even like hearing it. I don't want to
Hmm.
know what you're going to do with the money because odds are you're probably not even going to do that with the money if you get the money. Like I don't think I think sometimes people like if they have something very specific they know how much it costs and I just think like I wish the Amazing Race didn't have money. I
Hmm.
wish there was no prize. I wish we were just doing it for the vibes.
For the love of the
Um
game.
because I think it makes it a little crass and I don't think it's fair to root for somebody I because they need it more. Like it's not it's not a charity case. I hope that regardless of how any of these teams do, I hope they achieve the thing they want to do because
Yeah.
there's probably easier ways to go about it too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, look at Yvonne and Melissa, right? Like, very
All right.
understandably, $1 million could help in adopting a child, but hopefully it inspires people. Maybe we'll get to Mark and Brett as well, of like giving you the initiative and the energy to be and the drive to be like, look at what we just did together. We can find a way to find a way.
Yeah, and I think that's more valuable, honestly. Like discovering that about yourselves while you're out there and you kind of go on walkabout when you're on Amazing Race. You can kind of put this in your you can put this in your mind and like think about like this is going to test you as a couple. You shouldn't go on the race to test your relationship, but you are going to learn some things inevitably. And it's like an extreme version of going to Europe and backpacking. And you can do that without going on the Amazing Race. You can get $1 million without going on the Amazing Race. But I think learning some things about yourself and there's plenty of couples that have gone on the Amazing Race and realized, oh, this is not the person I want to be with.
Yeah.
Um, so there's room for epiphanies. I think that's more interesting to me than um, making the conditions of what you're going to do with the money any kind of reason to root for somebody or not. But the
All right.
fact that they're talking about it, the fact that they have a comparatively less interesting reason for doing it, and we're getting it anyway. This is a winner's edit thing for me, I think.
And it's interesting because it's pretty easy when you find out like, oh, if I win so and so, I'm going to propose to this person, and you find out, before the airing of the show begins, oh, they got engaged, is a pretty big red flag to like, oh yeah, then they probably won. I don't know. Has someone checked out the production quality of Carson and Jack's D&D show anytime soon? Should we check out exactly what that might mean in terms of the profits they're bringing in?
Yeah, do they have better mics now? Is the audio quality better? Are they shooting on location in Dubrovnik?
Do they have like a fiberglass dragon looking all over the players?
Yeah, they get some practical effects. They got like the dragon puppet coming in. Um, I yeah, I think the fact that we're hearing what they would do with the money is when it's not even like I think if it's like a team that's going out next week talking about what they're going to do with the money, it's not quite as necessary to know that they're going to improve their D&D show. And also, like, those people that say they're going to propose on the mat if they win, whatever. Like, I think Will and James were going to get engaged whether or not they won $1 million.
Yeah, and I think that ring. I mean, there's a reason why you bring the ring on the race.
Yeah, you can propose on any mat. It doesn't have to be the last mat.
All right, let's talk about our second place team here, who were stunned, perhaps the most shocked team of the evening, just to find out about their placement, because it was some rough sledding for Alyssa and Josiah, and where things really do fall apart here, nice like a nice crumbly feta, is at the cheese task to express pass or to not express pass, and I understand the arguments that were being made back and forth. From Josiah's perspective, it was probably like, I don't want to spend it here when A, we could feasibly finish this without being in last, and B, there might be a way hard task down the line that then we could have used the express pass on. They knew they had to use it in this leg, so they're not looking that far forward. But I very much see Alyssa's point, something that I think Josiah himself will even agree with later, which is like, when you're down to two teams, you got to use that thing. I always feel like the express pass is a little bit of like a shit or get off the pot moment where it's just like, you should not be languishing in a task for hours and then you decide to use it. But in this case, yeah, once you see the fact that regardless of what's ahead of you, this is something to actually visually keep you out of last place, you better give that thing away.
Yeah, like we can talk about the first season of Amazing Race Canada is the best example of this because you can see both detours from where these people are. They know they're in last place and they don't use the express pass. That's the kind of thing where you know where you stand at this task. You know what place you are in, and you know that if you don't get it ahead of this one other team, you are in a lot of trouble. I think that's the point to use it. And I mean, generally speaking, yeah, you should use it right away to get as much lead time as possible. But I I think there may be something to like try it a couple of times,
Hmm.
but they tried it plenty of times. And I was at the point I'm just like yelling at Josiah, like, no, you gotta use it. You guys gotta use it because if you don't, you're gonna be screwed. So it was a little infuriating, but also it was tense. It was interesting. It was fun. You didn't know if they were going to or not, and what if they hadn't? What if they hadn't and they went out?
Yeah. I mean, it would
Yeah.
have been really interesting because, I mean, then you could think about the dominoes of like, okay, does that mean they get to the Storks after Mark and Brett? And if so, do Mark and Brett try to follow them or do they get directions? And do Alyssa and Josiah try to follow them? There's a whole set of sliding doors. Luckily, Alyssa and Josiah do not join the ranks of those who go out with the express pass unused. And again, what I will say is, to your point, this was not the best look for Josiah whatsoever. In the fact that Alyssa kept insisting to him, let's use it. And he kept trying to, I think, whether purposely or not, kind of negate her feelings by being like, no, 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 no. We got this. It's fine. Let's keep going. I don't want to regret this before he finally does pull the trigger. But just looking at the way that he comforts and celebrates her on the mat, where like clearly she specifically is very besides herself. Again, Alyssa is someone who is this super type A passionate person, and so to have her just in absolute tears on the mat thinking that this all fell apart for them, only to realize that they were in second place, and then to have it immediately turn from him, from this, absolute jubilation, to like directing that energy towards his wife, saying, "You're the best. I was explaining you're the best, and you proved it." By comparison, I will say it was nice to see. Not the best look for Josiah over the course of 90 minutes, but over that 90-second period, it was a really warm look for him and a nice peek into their relationship.
Yeah, he got a redemption arc for sure at the end of this. I think I can see his point where it's like even if there's still like if the other team leaves and you're in very last place and you're very close to getting it, you can just dump that express pass the second you get to the detour.
Right.
I There's that, but just while I'm thinking about this just now, that had not occurred to me. But it's also like he listened to her. He let her make the call, and she made the right call, and they got through it, and they are still here. And they are so pure. I love them so much, and I want them to do well.
All right, Jess, let's talk about our third place team here.
It's time. It's
Yes,
time.
mutual sigh. Let's talk about Jonathan and Anna. And I will once again preface this by saying that, as we have mentioned a few weeks ago, Jonathan and Anna do have a weekly YouTube show, like a lot of racers do, where they talk through their own experiences, both in the moment on the race as well as afterwards. Jonathan has explained that, following his time on The Amazing Race, he did get diagnosed with autism, and he has acknowledged the fact that, looking back on their experience, he and Anna have both realized that, they wanted to make some changes in their relationship, that they wanted to use this, as much as I'm talking about that you can't necessarily map this one-to-one onto your real life relationship. They wanted to try to use this as a way to grow and learn from this, which is incredibly admirable. All
That's
that is, yeah, all that is,
self-aware.
exactly. All that is to say, it does not obfuscate what happened on the race. And I am sorry, it is an objectively terrible look for someone to outright say you're a terrible partner in the middle of a leg.
There is no circumstance on The Amazing Race, literally none, in which anybody should ever say that to anybody else. And it is a bridge too far. Like, you screwed up, fine. This is your fault. Okay, but you are a terrible partner, especially because she's not. She's not a terrible partner. She's doing great, actually. But I do want to go down a little bit of a tangent here, Mike, because I want to be really, really careful about how we are talking about Jonathan and Anna, because we don't know what they're, we are talking specifically about everything we saw on TV and a few things we saw on YouTube. We're not talking about anything. We've never met them. We do not know them in real life. We do not know anything about the specificities of Jonathan's diagnosis or their marriage dynamic outside of what we've seen, this very carefully edited selection of it. But I want to speak as a neurodivergent person and a neurodivergent parent. Something that I think could explain and definitely, 200-point boldface type, not excuse what's going on here, but something that happens when you are, whether or not you've been diagnosed at a young age or as an adult, when you are neurodivergent, you receive negative feedback at a rate that is exponentially higher than a neurotypical person. And you constantly, and sometimes you don't even know why you are getting it, and you are constantly being criticized, and you take the criticism a little bit harder than another person, in part because you receive so much more of it, and in part because your body just doesn't know how to physiologically process it as well as somebody that does not receive this level of criticism. So there's a little bit, I think there's a little bit of rejection sensitive dysphoria happening here, whereby I think even when something goes wrong and it is your fault, your impulse is, I have to get the heat off of me as quickly as possible, because you're so used to getting so much of that negative feedback and you don't want any of it. And so it just becomes this thing where you've done something wrong and you need to just shove it off onto the nearest possible person, like blame it on someone else, come up with an excuse that's plausible enough that you might be able to weasel your way out of having to hear about it. And I think I kind of saw that happening with Jonathan a few times, where he would tell Anna to do something and she would do it and it would be wrong. And he would be like, this was you did that. This is wrong. And it's just because he's going into fight or flight mode. He's going into panic mode, and he's thinking, like, I'm going to get the blowback on this because I was wrong. And he's already being more critical on himself. And Phil said this. He's never seen anybody as hard on himself as Jonathan is. And I think that's kind of what is happening to Jonathan. And I could be way off base here, but in fact, this is also why I'm so careful about why we talk about them, because I am the same way. I'm the same way about this. And I know, like, they're going to be listening. They're going to comment and they're going to say something like, here is point by point where you are wrong. And I'm like, I don't want to be wrong. I can't be wrong. And so I understand how that feels. And I don't excuse anything he said to Anna, because he said some really terrible things to her this leg. And I'm sure they worked it out on their own time and they've had conversations about this, but I could see, especially if he was not diagnosed at the time and he did not know that was going on,
Right.
I think it could be even worse. Because sometimes when you do know, you can sort of prime yourself to take it, or you'll know this is why I'm acting this way. And he's acting this way. He may not even know why he's acting this way.
Mm.
And I can see where that is really hard. But that being said, that's maybe not the time to go on The Amazing Race.
Yeah. I think all of that is incredibly well said. And whether or not that is the case or not, thank you so much for opening up about your own life, your own, neurotypical livelihood and how that sort of affects you. And what I will say is, I personally would rather talk about how much Anna just has the absolute patience and temperament to be able to take a lot of stuff that was thrown her way. And I completely understand what you said, that if this is the case of Jonathan's way of kind of, digesting what's happening and trying to handle it in his own way, but it comes across in an incredibly unempathetic perspective where Anna is taking so much of it to
It
the point
does.
where they're in the car and he is saying out loud, Lord, help me with this woman. Lord, give me patience. It was a heartbreaking moment where whether the sun was in her eyes or not, she put the sunglasses on
Yeah.
to kind of, I think, just block things out and just keep going and try to, simultaneously probably tune out the stuff that he's giving her while also listening to his directions at the same time. And God, I'll be honest, I felt awful for her at the pit stop when she has to be the one to step forward, or felt like she had to be the one, and whether she believed it or not, to be the one to say like, "Yep, it was my fault. I did a terrible job getting our cardinal directions and we could have been in first place. It's all on me. Sorry, I'll do better."
Yeah, and that's also, I think it's also like the price of admission for, and it's a terrible thing to say, like they really need to work, they work it out on themselves, and I think she knows it doesn't make it any less hurtful, it doesn't make it any harder to deal with, but I think she's also used to it
Hmm.
in some ways, and I think she knows, like, she knows when to take it seriously and when to, and like how to handle him, whether or not she knew what was going on with him. But yeah, it was so hard. Like when she put the sunglasses on, that was honestly, I think it's probably been a decade since I've been that upset by something that I've seen on the race. And she really is the MVP of the team.
Yeah.
Like the way she just keeps it cool and keeps it together. Um, and I think in that moment, it might have been she's doing this for him. It's like she knows he can't step up and say, I screwed up. This is my fault, because it's just going to crush him. And so she takes that on, and she shouldn't have to. She shouldn't have
Hmm.
to, but it's something like, ask me how I know what it's like to be married to a neurodivergent person. That's it's something like sometimes you take that on even when you shouldn't have to, and even when it's hard, I
Yeah.
think.
And for what it's worth, due to the direction snafu, they end up in last place going into the detour. And it seems like, from our perspective at least, Anna is able to lead the team to do it in one try and pass up Han and Holden. So, even if she may get some sort of blame necessarily or not for getting, not the greatest directions to put them behind in the first place, they're able to make up a good amount of time due to her, past laundry experience doing it by hand.
Yeah, well, this could also be one of these baseball situations of, do we award the pitcher the win or do we award
Hmm.
the other pitcher the loss? Because I think Han and Holden, if they're a little bit more conscientious at the start, I think we have a different conversation here. But honestly, I think there's the sliding door universe works out the same way, because I don't think either one of them were in any real danger in the end. Like, Jonathan and Anna may have been in the last place by a bit when they get to the laundry, but they end up accidentally picking the easier task. And I don't think there's a universe in which like Mark and Brett leapfrog over them.
Hmm.
I think
Well,
they did a great job here on this
let's
task.
talk. Well, let's talk about Han and Holden. La Cucaracha continues to live, and they are starting to bug each other, Jess. And I saw a comment last week that I want to get into a bit where someone, and this is obviously before everything that happened with Jonathan this week, so I'd be intrigued to feel the same way, but they had essentially said, like, I understand why everyone is talking about, how they don't like Jonathan's behavior towards Anna, but why are we not talking about Han and Holden's behavior towards each other? In particular, that in the past, it felt like Han was dismissive towards Holden. This episode was not great for Holden. Now, granted, he might have had some severe gastrointestinal distress, but there's this moment where he's basically like, really forcing himself into Han, trying to get directions on this poor couple's phone of just like, well, you get directions wrong sometimes, so I need to double check. There's a lot of really clear tension that exists between the two of them. But speak to this, Jess. Do you feel like it's of a different quality than a Jonathan and Anna, and should it be given some scrutiny?
Well, again, this is a situation of a different kind of relationship. Han and Holden are not going to decide, like, barring something really extreme and not something that I think could happen on The Amazing Race, they're not going to decide not to be siblings. They can't wake up and like file paperwork to stop being siblings. It's unusual, at least. And I think you can also, with your sibling, accordingly, you speak to them differently. And in this case, it wasn't coming from a place of blame or of deflection. It was coming from a place of, he's anxious because he wants to know. He needs to have that in his head, and he can't like let go and trust that she's going to have it. But also, like, I can't imagine that all of the cheese was helpful in that situation. And it was a hard navigational leg. Everybody got lost. It was something that I think they had to be double careful about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that the tough thing as well is that these two were very clearly feeling the pressure, right? Like, I think the dynamic they had towards each other in this leg was best represented in the lead up to the pit stop, where Han's like, Holden, we've been through this before, we've survived this before. And Holden actually says, yeah, but the teams behind us before are not as good as these teams now. Like, I think Holden's very much still not even coming in from the perspective of like everything needs to be perfect because that's the way that we usually operate. It's more so operating under the perspective of, we can't make any slip ups or mistakes because that will cost you the race amongst this strong crop of teams. And for what it's worth, I'll give them a lot of credit in that they were able to maintain a lead throughout the leg. It is wild that apparently them reaching the head-to-head first was the first time they ever arrived at a task in first place over 10 legs of The Amazing Race. But I think one reason why they survived yet another leg is the fact that that lead was able to afford them a bit of wiggle room where if and when they did slip down to the bottom of the pack, it afforded them at least a little bit more time than Merck and Brett.
Yeah, they gave themselves a little bit of cushion there, but I was almost hoping that when they got to that task in first place, like, are we seeing a Han and Holden win for the leg? That would have been so amazing.
Yeah, and it would have, again, I think with, as we'll talk about very soon, losing out on one of the most consistent performing teams of the season could have been this fun narrative of like, oh, could Han and Holden slip in and take it? Now, look, as we've seen many times on The Amazing Race, first place finishes really don't matter. All that matters is what you take home in the very last leg. But without getting into too much, Jess, I think there's still a shot that La Cucaracha could get crushed right outside of the final three.
I mean, if we're putting Vegas odds on it, I'm going to say probably they go out on Wednesday. But how cool would it be if they won, Mike? How cool. Like, it's the Cinderella story.
Mm-hmm.
It's the comeback kids, and they really are kids compared to the rest of these. I would love it. We've never had, like, it's been very rare that we've had like the really, really young team come up and like defeat all of the oldsters to win it. And of course, I'm calling people that are like 29 oldsters in this case. And
it's all about
in a
perspective.
season where the oldest person on the race that wasn't their partner's parent was like my age. So, take that with a grain of salt, but it's been a minute since we've had like a comparatively young sibling team end up taking this. So, and especially a team that's had this many ups and downs, it would be such a great story. And I would be so here for it.
Yeah, and I love whenever teams are able to like formally say, yeah, we've learned something and we're trying to adopt. Because I imagine a lot of these teams do. Mark, and Brett talked about it with me about like how them being not necessarily so in danger of getting eliminated in those first few legs, but like being so middle of the pack gave them so much new perspective on what they need to do and how they position themselves amongst the other teams. To have Han and Holden vocalize like, yeah, we learned that good enough is good enough. And yeah, to your earlier point, maybe they shot a little too low this time around in terms of like, what's a couple stains on an old shirt? Here you go, laundry lady. Don't mind it. But I guess in terms of a lesson you have to learn, quite literally better late than never, as opposed to, getting bogged down in the roadblock next task where you feel like you have to get every minute detail correct. And surprise, surprise, you're in last place and eliminated.
Yeah. Yeah. But I feel like with this, we've said it a couple of times on this podcast already, but I feel like you knew what the metric was. You didn't have to, like, this was not the one to go for good enough.
Yeah.
This is the one to, like, there is a thing, the thing needs to not be there, make the thing not be there, and then you win the task.
Yeah, it's an O to 1 instead of some sort of like gradient you have to get graded on.
Right, right. This one was not terribly subjective.
All right, well, let us talk about the subjective, if you will, of both of our exit interviews. We mentioned them a bunch of times. Brett and Mark eliminated here, and it was a little more up and down than we may have thought in the beginning of the leg when they get lost immediately, fall to last place, they lose the head-to-head, get the 10-minute penalty, leave it to the cheese to help them catch up a little bit. But I know we've sort of been parsing our thoughts throughout here. Any final thoughts on Brett and Mark as a team?
Um, I mean, they're great guys. There was a minute there where I thought they were doing like we're getting like the comeback kids story on Brett and Mark, especially the way that they had so many big ups and downs in those early seasons, like with the intersection, and with them like really starting to figure it out and come up and get up on top for some of the legs before ultimately going out near the end. I have not seen a team really with a learning curve as much as Brett and Mark. Like so many seasons, we just have like the teams that are going to go far and the teams that are just going to get picked off one by one. And this was a team that I felt like the writing might have been on the wall for them the first couple of legs. And then they started to figure it out and dominate. And you don't see that very often. And it would have been a great story.
Yeah, and it was interesting hearing their perspectives as to how their race philosophy sort of shifted in those early legs of like, we could go anytime. We might get another random musical intersection with a guy that doesn't know how to keep a beat. So, like, let's just have fun. And not to say that, like, I don't want team drama on the race. We've talked about this many legs, many seasons prior, that, like, I think it is still partially, at least somewhat of the lifeblood of the show. Some of those platelets floating around of, like, the natural drama that might occur racing around the world with someone that you know and in some cases love. But it's also nice to hear their perspective that like a lot of their consternation was more so directed out rather than in. And that despite the fact that these two had such fundamentally different approaches to things, whereas Brett keeps things light and Mark is, again, sometimes getting angry just to be angry, as he says, that the two of them were able to be pretty dang copacetic in their relationship. And even though they did have some conflict, it never necessarily flared up in a way that you might expect given their different personality types.
They were so balanced, I think. Like I think they
well, yeah,
were
they're
really
both between their respective job lines. I think balance is very key for both of them.
Comes with the territory. It's like the 5 hole of character traits. They're so like they're so fundamentally like they're different personalities that really end up meshing well, and the whole ends up being greater than the sum of its parts. And I think they talked with me a little bit about like how much they've grown and learned about each other and how much they didn't really know going in, that they sort of solidified over the course of the race, and things that like they were kind of each other's cheerleaders to find things that they didn't know they were capable of. And I think there was such a great self-discovery arc about the two of them over the course of the race.
Well, Jess, we are approaching the 2-part finale of The Amazing Race next week. And I think it's time that we stake our claim. So give to me, in your opinion, looking into your crystal ball, what is going to be the finish order of our top 4 teams when all is said and done next Thursday?
All right. All right, here we go.
Work our way up from 4th to 1st. Let's have
All
the
right.
suspense going.
I'm going Han and Holden 4th.
Okay.
I'm going Alyssa Josiah 3rd, Jonathan Anna 2nd, and Carson and Jack are going to win.
Okay. Yeah, I could definitely see that. I'll be contrary just for the fun of it. I will say Jonathan and Anna finish in 4th. That maybe we get a bit of like the closer they get to the golden goose, the more that they self-destruct. And it's a little bit of an odd energy that they have to kind of draft off of from this most recent leg. And so maybe that's going to kind of get in their heads for this next one. So I think the intensity will unfortunately have them flame out in 4th place. I think that puts Han and Holden as like a pretty requisite, like they fall out of it early on and then finish in 3rd. And then it'll be between Alyssa and Josiah and Carson and Jack for 1st and 2nd. It's tough. I think I'll still put Carson and Jack in 1st place, and this is pretty rarefied territory where I feel like between Greg and John and Ricky and Cesar, they're really, especially with Ricky and Cesar, there were not a lot of opportunities where we thought like, oh my God, they're about to get eliminated right now. They're the front runners to win it all. And so Carson and Jack would be a little separate from these modern day Amazing Race teams in that there were quite a few times where things got dicey with them and they love to roll some dice. But I still think for whatever it is between the racing skills, between the narrative, and just between the gut of it all, the cheese-filled gut, that it feels like the race is theirs. I think they've been more main characters than Alyssa and Josiah, and The Amazing Race has never been a show necessarily, to your point about a winner's edit, to like make the main characters always the number one team, but it just feels right,
It does. It feels like we've had a good narrative arc for them. That's kind of how I'm feeling too.
All right. Well, we shall see in just 1 week's time. So, bit of a programming note due to the back-to-back nature of these episodes. Jess and I figured, and look, with no offense to these teams, with no offense to The Amazing Race, I don't know how much we could squeeze out of 2 90-minute episodes of the Final Four and the Final Three. Jess has always famously said that the premiere and finale are often the worst legs of an Amazing Race season, just given the fact that there's not a lot to go around with very few teams. So we found it best that we're just going to do one big wrap up next Friday, talking about the final 2 legs, the final 4 teams, how it all shook out, and our thoughts on the season overall as we look forward to the fall. May have a special guest or special guests joining us. That's all going to be TBD. But otherwise, Jess and I will absolutely be here. In the meantime, Jess, any other stuff you want to plug from your interview with Mark and Brett, which people can hopefully enjoy right after this?
I mean, they're truly delightful. I loved getting a chance to talk to them. Really excited to have you guys hear it, and I hope you like it.
And of course, you can follow my interview with Mark and Brett over on Parade. I talk with Survivor over there, as well as on the B&B. There's plenty of stuff happening, a veritable cheese platter of content. But next week, we will take 2 big bites out of the remaining pieces of this season, as we'll see who's the last team eliminated on Wednesday night, and then on Thursday night, it all gets concluded, and we will see which team crosses the finish line first, wins the $1 million prize, and makes their dreams come true. Thank you, as always, for the support. I know that there's some really heavy stuff to get into with some of these teams, particularly in this episode, and we always appreciate those that give us the opportunity and the grace with talking through some of these thornier subjects. I know I certainly am excited to be able to talk with all 4 teams next week to get their perspective certainly on some of these moments throughout the race, and get to see exactly what their perspective is on their past and present and how it informs their future. But in the future for you is next Friday, Jess and I will be back talking through the last 2 episodes of The Amazing Race 37. Thank you all, as always, so much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
This is RHAP. We know reality TV.